In 1932, one of the richest men in the world was found dead in a Paris apartment. A gunshot wound, no clear explanation, and within days, his global empire began to collapse, revealing a financial deception so massive, it shocked the world. Today, we talk about startup frauds, crypto scams, and billion-dollar collapses. But long before modern finance, there was a man who perfected the art of illusion, a man who controlled markets, governments, and investor trust. His name was Ivar Kreuger, the man they called the Match King. In the early 1920s, Europe was recovering from World War I. Economies were unstable, governments were desperate for funding, and traditional banks were cautious. This created an opportunity, a gap in the system, one that Ivar Kreuger saw clearly. Kreuger was not just a businessman. He was an engineer, a strategist, a visionary, but most importantly, he understood money. He began building a global matchstick empire, acquiring companies across Europe and beyond, consolidating control, creating what would become a near monopoly. But Kreuger's real innovation was not matches, it was finance. He offered governments something no one else could: loans, massive loans, at a time when few others were willing to lend. But there was a condition in exchange for funding. Kreuger demanded monopoly rights, exclusive control over match production in those countries. It worked. Governments agreed, deals were signed, and his empire expanded rapidly. Soon, Kreuger controlled match industries across multiple countries. His influence stretched across continents. His wealth skyrocketed. Investors were fascinated. Here was a man who seemed unstoppable, a financial genius, a global power broker. But Kreuger needed more money to sustain growth, to fund loans, to expand his empire further. So he turned to investors. He introduced a new type of investment, high-yield bonds, offering returns that seemed incredibly attractive, stable, reliable, consistent. Investors poured in. From Europe, from America, from institutions and individuals alike. Because the story made sense. A global monopoly, government-backed deals, predictable revenue. It looked safe. But behind the scenes, the system was fragile. Kreuger's empire depended on constant cash flow, new investments, new loans, new deals, and when real profits weren't enough, he began to manipulate the numbers. Accounts were adjusted, financial statements were altered, assets were overstated. In some cases, revenue simply didn't exist. Money from new investors was used to support old obligations, maintaining the illusion of stability. It wasn't a simple fraud. It was a complex financial web spanning countries, currencies, and institutions, and for years, it worked because Kreuger had built something powerful: trust. Banks trusted him, governments trusted him, investors trusted him, and as long as that trust remained, the system held together. But then, things began to change. The global economy weakened, the Great Depression spread across the world, liquidity tightened, investors became cautious, and suddenly, the flow of new money slowed down, pressure built, obligations remained, but the resources to meet them were disappearing. Cracks started to appear. Questions were raised. Accounts were examined. Doubts began to grow. And then, in 1932, everything changed. Ivar Kreuger was found dead. His death shocked the world, but what came next was even more shocking. As investigators began examining his empire, they uncovered the truth. The financial statements were misleading. The assets were inflated. The structure was unsustainable. Billions in value simply vanished. Investors lost massive amounts of money. Banks faced exposure. Governments were affected. one of the largest financial empires in the world, collapsed almost overnight, and the mystery deepened. Was Kreuger's death a suicide, a planned escape, or something else entirely? To this day, questions remain, but one thing is clear: the Match King's empire was built not just on business, but on belief. Belief in stability, belief in growth, belief in a man who seemed unstoppable. And when that belief broke, everything else followed. The aftermath changed global finance. Stricter regulations were introduced, financial reporting standards improved, transparency became more important because Kreuger exposed something dangerous: that even the most powerful empires can be built on illusion, and that illusion can last far longer than expected. But eventually, reality catches up. Today, nearly a century later, the story still feels familiar, from corporate frauds to financial bubbles to modern-day scams. The pattern repeats: big promises, strong narratives, and numbers that no one questions until it's too late. So what do you think? Was Ivar Kreuger a visionary ahead of his time, or a master manipulator who engineered one of history's biggest financial illusions? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Because in finance, power is built on trust, and trust is built on numbers. But when those numbers are false, everything built on them is destined to fall. Because sometimes the greatest empires in history aren't destroyed by competition. They collapse under the weight of their own illusion. For more such knowledge, subscribe and hit the bell icon.